You think you know danger? The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the town of Dry Creek, a dust-choked settlement clinging to the edges of lawlessness. A wooden gallows, its ropes frayed and weathered, loomed over the main street, a grim reminder of the justice that had little mercy for the desperate. The scent of sweat and gunpowder lingered in the air, mingling with the baked earth, while townsfolk gathered with their murmurs, their faces drawn tight with a blend of curiosity and dread. At the far end of the street, a figure emerged from the saloon, his silhouette a stark contrast against the crimson sky. Thaddeus Tad McAllister wore a weathered hat low over his brow, the brim casting shadows across his thoughtful eyes. He was a man shaped by the land, a cowboy who had earned his keep by breaking horses and mending fences. Yet he carried a weight that day heavier than the saddle on his back. He had come to witness the hanging, a spectacle of frontier justice that left a bitter taste in his mouth. Tad leaned against the rough-hewn post of the livery stable, the wooden slats warm from the sun's embrace as he watched the proceedings unfold. The condemned, a frail girl named Clara, stood at the base of the gallows, her hands bound and her face pale as the clouds that occasionally drifted over the relentless blue sky. She was a mere whisper of a thing, caught in a tempest far beyond her control, accused of a robbery that had left a man dead. A crime she had not committed, of that Tad was certain. "Who's gonna save her?" A voice called out from the crowd, a gruff, sun-beaten man whose words dripped with disdain. "Ain't no one gonna stand against Judge Hargrove." The judge was known for his iron fist, a man whose gavel fell like thunder, and Tad felt the anger rise within him, a fire igniting at the thought of an innocent girl swinging from that rope. As the judge took his place, a heavy-set man in a black coat that seemed to absorb the sunlight, the murmurs of the crowd quieted into an anxious stillness. The judge cleared his throat, and the sound reverberated through the gathered folk like a rattlesnake's warning. But Tad couldn't shake the feeling that mercy was not meant for this place. It was a luxury reserved for those who could afford it, and Clara was not among them. The judge's voice boomed over the assembled townsfolk, each word wrapped in authority and laced with disdain. "This here is a lesson, folks. A lesson for those who think they can play the hand of the law." He paused, surveying the crowd as if he were an emperor presiding over his subjects, the gallows towering behind him like a monument to his power. "Clara Wren is guilty of murder, and justice will be served." Tad's heart raced, the blood rushing in his ears as he pushed away from the livery post. The crowd surged forward, but he stepped back, feeling the weight of the eyes upon him. They could sense his resolve, a spark of rebellion in a town that had long since extinguished its flames. He could hear the whispering of the wind, urging him to act, to defy the order that had been so casually laid down by a man who answered to no one but himself. "Wait!" Tad shouted, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. Heads turned, the crowd's scrutiny shifting to him. He took a step forward, heart pounding, every breath a battle against the fear that threatened to choke him. "What do you think you're doing, cowboy?" A man in the crowd spat, his face contorted with scorn. "You think you can just waltz in and change the judge's mind?" "I know she's innocent," Tad replied, the words bursting forth like a dam breaking. "She didn't kill nobody," the crowd murmured, uncertainty rippling through them as they weighed the implications of what he was saying. The judge's glare cut through him, a blade of ice that promised retribution. "Enough of this nonsense," Judge Hargrove shouted, his voice booming, saturated with authority. "The law has spoken. Clara Wren will hang, and anyone who dares to interfere will answer to me." Tad felt the weight of the gun at his hip, a reminder of the choice he had to make. He glanced back at Clara, her eyes wide with fear and desperation. In that moment, he saw not just a girl sentenced to die, but a reflection of every soul crushed beneath the unforgiving weight of the law. The townsfolk were no longer spectators. They were complicit in her fate. The gallows loomed like a dark omen, shadows stretching long across the dirt street as the sun dipped low, turning the sky a bruised purple. Tad's heart thudded in his chest, each beat a drum roll for the dance of fate he was about to initiate. He squared his shoulders, drawing a deep breath that filled his lungs with dust and resolve. "You got it wrong, Judge," he shouted again, voice steady, fists clenching at his sides. The crowd stirred, a flock of uncertain sheep, some whispering to one another, others casting wary glances at the judge, whose face had turned a shade darker than the evening sky. "What do you know of the law, boy?" Hargrove's voice cut through the murmurs like a whip crack, and the air thickened with tension. "You're just a drifter, a nobody. This is not your fight." His words dripped with contempt, echoing against the wooden storefronts that lined the street, a harsh reminder that power often wielded more might than truth. Clara's gaze burned into Tad, her fear mingling with incredulity. He could see the flicker of hope igniting in her eyes, and it fueled his determination. He stepped closer to the judge, every step a challenge to the authority that had suffocated their lives for too long. "You think your gavel makes you a god, Hargrove? You think you can judge a soul like Clara's through the lens of your own twisted sense of justice?" The judge's lip curled, disdain twisting his features. "You'll regret this, boy. Your bravado will get you nothing but a noose of your own." He gestured dismissively, and the crowd shifted, some taking a step back as if afraid of being caught in the crossfire of a conflict they had no desire to witness. "Then let it come," Tad said, his voice rising above the clamor, imbued with a ferocity that surprised even him. "But I won't stand by while an innocent woman swings from that noose." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of defiance, and for a moment, the murmur of the crowd quieted, as if in contemplation. "Step away, cowboy," a grizzled man with a weathered face replied, his tone laced with caution. "You don't know what you're asking for." The crowd's unease rippled like a breeze through rustling leaves, the tension thick enough to cut. Tad's eyes darted to the gallows, where the rope hung like a serpent poised to strike. And for a heartbeat, the world narrowed to that singular point of mortality. Clara's life dangled on the edge, and the stakes had never been clearer. "Ain't no law that says you can take a life without just cause," he pressed, voice rising again, daring to challenge the authority woven into the very fabric of their town. Judge Hargrove drew himself up, his shadow stretching like a vengeful spirit across the dust, and the sun caught the glint of the metal on his belt, the symbol of his power. "Just cause?" he sneered. "You think your pretty words change the fact that she's accused of murder? You think your heart can sway the law?" Each syllable dripped with a venom that left a bitter taste in Tad's mouth. The townsfolk shuffled, some eyes flickering with doubt, others hardened with the weight of blind allegiance. The law was a two-edged sword in these parts, sharp enough to cut deep, but oftentimes wielded by those with the least moral integrity. "You see a murderer," Tad shot back, his fists trembling at his sides. "But I see a woman pushed to the brink. You think you can hang her and call it justice? That's a gallows built on a foundation of lies." The judge's gaze hardened, and Tad felt the weight of the crowd shift, as if they were a living entity, oscillating between loyalty to their judge and the flicker of compassion ignited by his words. Clara stood in the shadow of death, her face pale but resolute, and the sight of her stoked the fire in his belly. "I'll do whatever it takes," he vowed, the words spilling from his lips as if pulled by an unseen force. "If it means dragging your twisted sense of justice into the light, I'll do it." Hargrove's laugh was a low rumble, like thunder before a storm, and he stepped closer, invading Tad's space, his breath reeking of tobacco and malice. "You'll find yourself on the wrong side of the law, cowboy. You think your words will save her? You'll be the one swinging from that rope if you're not careful." So be it, Tad thought, his spine straightening, the resolve in him hardening like iron. The judge's words hung in the air, a specter of threat, but Tad wasn't about to let fear dictate his actions. He took a step forward, the dust swirling around his boots, and the crowd parted slightly, a river of wary eyes watching him cross the threshold into defiance. "You'll have to catch me first," he challenged, feeling the pulse of adrenaline quicken in his veins. Clara's gaze met his, and in that brief exchange, he saw not just a plea for salvation, but a shared understanding of the risks they faced. The ropes binding her to the gallows seemed to tighten, yet somehow she stood taller, her spirit unbroken. A flicker of hope ignited within him, and it felt almost absurd to think that he could be the one to change the course of fate for a woman who had been cast aside. The judge, stung by Tad's blatant disregard, waved a hand dismissively. "You'll learn, boy," he growled, retreating a few paces only to pull the gavel from his pocket like a gun from a holster. The sound of it striking the wooden podium echoed through the square, a call to order that sent a shiver down Tad's spine. "This court will see justice done, and you'll find yourself in a cell long before you can think about saving anyone." A murmur rippled through the crowd, and Tad sensed the tide of public opinion shifting. But he knew it could snap back just as quickly. These folks had grown accustomed to the judge's iron-fisted rule. Their fear was a well-placed bridle. But he was driven by something deeper than self-preservation now. "I'll gather the evidence," he promised, his voice ringing with conviction. "You can't hang her without proof, and I'll find the truth if it's the last thing I do." As he turned to leave, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the dirt street, and the air thickened with the scent of impending rain. He felt the weight of the townsfolk's eyes on him, a mix of skepticism and curiosity. Would they follow him into the darkness, or would they choose the safety of submission to the judge's will? Tad strode away with purpose, determination pushing him forward. He needed answers. Tad strode away with purpose, determination pushing him forward. He needed answers, and the saloon was the only place where the truth might be found lurking among the whiskey and smoke. The wooden door creaked open as he entered, the dim light revealing a haze of cigarette smoke and the rough faces of men whose laughter had the sharpness of broken glass. He took a deep breath, the air thick with the scent of sweat and spilled beer, and felt the weight of the place settle on his shoulders like a heavy coat. "Look who we got here," a voice drawled from the far corner, where a group of men hunched over a table, cards in hand. Davy Joe, a well-known gambler with a reputation for keeping his nose in everyone's business, leaned back in his chair, a smirk plastered across his face. "The lawman's gonna save the day, huh? You ought to know better than to tangle with that judge." Ignoring the jeers and laughter that erupted around him, Tad approached the bar, his eyes scanning the room for the bartender, a grizzled man named Hank who had seen enough trouble to fill a ledger. Hank was polishing a glass, his face lined with the stories of 1,000 drinks poured and 1,000 more drunk. "What'll it be, Tad?" he asked, his tone a mix of curiosity and caution. "I'm looking for information," Tad replied, leaning on the counter, his voice low and earnest. "About Clara. I need to know what evidence the judge has against her." Hank's brow furrowed, his hands pausing in their work. "You're playing a dangerous game, son. You know how the judge operates. He don't need much to hang a woman in this town." "I know," Tad admitted, a knot forming in his stomach. "But something ain't adding up. I need to find out what really happened that night." A silence fell over the saloon as the men turned their attention to him, the laughter dying like a candle snuffed out. Tad could feel their scrutiny, each pair of eyes weighing his resolve against the risks of defying the judge. "You want to go digging where you shouldn't, boy?" Davy Joe sneered, his tone laced with mockery. "I hear the judge don't take kindly to folks poking their noses where they don't belong." A flicker of unease rippled through Tad, but he held his ground, summoning the courage that had seen him through countless perilous nights. "I'm not afraid of the judge," he said, his voice steady despite the tremor beneath. "And I'm not afraid of you either." The challenge hung in the air like a storm cloud, charged and electric. Hank leaned closer, his voice a harsh whisper. "You best think long and hard before you go digging, son. Clara's got nails in her coffin already. It ain't just rumors that have got her in that noose. The bartender's eyes darted toward the door, as if expecting the judge to stride through it at any moment, his looming shadow casting dread over the saloon. "Tell me what you know, Hank," Tad pressed, the urgency in his voice rising above the murmurs. "She deserves a chance, and I ain't about to let some crooked judge decide her fate." The bartender sighed, his shoulders slumping under the weight of years spent in a town where the law and the lawless often blurred. "You really want to know?" he asked, his voice low. "Last I heard, the judge has got a witness who swears she was seen at the scene of the crime. Claims she was with that outlaw, Sam Grady. You know how that'll go down? A woman with a man like that? Ain't no jury gonna look twice before deciding." A knot tightened in Tad's throat, the name sending a chill through him. Sam Grady was a ghost of the worst sort, a specter that haunted the outskirts of town, leaving nothing but chaos in his wake. "But how do they know?" Tad questioned, his heart racing. "You think she was set up?" Hank shook his head, a grimace crossing his weathered face. "In this town, truth don't matter much. What folks see through whiskey-tinted lenses is all that counts. If the judge's got her in his sights, she'll hang before the sun rises again." A bitter laugh escaped Davy Joe, who had been listening intently. "You really think you can save her? You're just a boy with a badge, Tad. You don't have the weight to move the judge, let alone save a woman like Clara." His jeering words were like a bullet fired in an empty room, ricocheting. A bitter laugh escaped Davy Joe, who had been listening intently. "You really think you can save her? You're just a boy with a badge, Tad. You don't have the weight to move the judge, let alone save a woman like Clara." His jeering words were like a bullet fired in an empty room, ricocheting off the walls and hitting Tad squarely in the chest. The saloon, with its haze of pipe smoke and stale beer, felt suddenly small, as if the very air conspired against him. Tad clenched his fists, the rough wood of the bar digging into his palms. He could feel the eyes of the patrons boring into him, heavy with cynicism and doubt. "I may not have the weight of a man, but I've got the will of one," he shot back, his voice rising like a flame hungry for more oxygen. "And that's worth something, isn't it?" The bartender looked at him with a mixture of pity and respect. "Will don't keep a noose from tightening, son. You better be prepared for what's coming." Just then, the door swung open with a creak that echoed like a Judgment Day bell. The judge entered, his silhouette framed by the fading light of dusk, a man who carried the weight of the law like a shroud. The air chilled as his presence swept through the saloon, silencing the raucous laughter and murmurs. He was a man who wore authority like a well-tailored coat, and the glint in his eye told stories of countless lives he had shaped with a mere word. "Evening, folks," he drawled, his voice smooth yet chilling like the first frost of winter. "I trust you're all behaving yourselves." Tad's heart raced. He knew this was the moment to act, to confront the embodiment of the threat against Clara's life. "Judge," he called out, his voice steadying as he stepped away from the bar, each pace feeling like a step into the firing line. "I need to speak with you about Clara." The judge's brow arched, amusement flickering across his face. "And what business does a boy like you have with matters of life and death?" "More than you'd think," Tad replied, feeling the weight of everyone's gaze on him. "You're not really going to let them hang her, are you?" The judge chuckled, a low rumble that felt like distant thunder, unsettling the saloon's atmosphere. "If the evidence holds, it won't be my decision, son. You know that as well as I do." He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, exuding an air of unshakable authority, as if he were the very law itself incarnate. Tad's breath quickened, a storm of frustration and fear brewing deep inside him. "But she didn't kill anyone. It was self-defense." His words cut through the thick air, raw and desperate, echoing against the worn wooden walls. He felt the weight of the patrons' stares, their eyes a mixture of skepticism and unspoken judgment, as if he were standing naked before them. "Self-defense?" the judge mused, his voice dripping with condescension. In a town where a woman's heart can be a weapon more dangerous than a revolver. How quaint. He cracked a grin, revealing teeth stained by tobacco. You do well to remember this ain't a fairy tale, boy. A shiver ran down Tad's spine, a cold realization settling in like a winter fog. The judge had the power to twist the narrative, to bend the truth until it broke under the weight of his gavel. What if I can prove it? Tad pressed, feeling the desperation seep into his words. What if I can find the real killer? The judge's laughter echoed in the dim light, a cruel sound that brought the other patrons' heads down in shame. You think you can unravel the tangled web of this town's secrets? You're outmatched, outgunned, and out of your league. He pushed away from the doorframe, stepping further into the saloon, the shadows shifting like a predator ready to pounce. You have one chance to walk away from this, boy. Leave the dead to rest. Tad's heart raced. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but Clara's face flashed in his mind. Her laugh, her spirit, the way she fought for her place in a world that was determined to crush her. I can't, he whispered, more to himself than to the judge, steeling himself against the inevitable storm. Then you're a fool, the judge replied, his tone sharper than a knife edge. And fools hang first. With a wave of his hand, the saloon's wooden floor creaked underfoot as Tad felt the full weight of the judge's words settle like lead in his stomach. The judge turned, his shadow swallowing the light from the oil lamps, and with each step, he seemed to grow larger, more imposing. Tad could taste the bitterness of his own fear, a metallic tang that mingled with the stale whiskey in the air. The patrons' eyes were no longer filled with curiosity. They had turned cold, like the steel of a gun barrel, watching but saying nothing. The door swung open, and a gust of cool evening air swept in, stirring the dust at the saloon's entrance. Tad's gaze flicked to the outside world, where the sky was bruised with the colors of dusk, and the first stars began to prick the horizon like scattered diamonds. He felt an urge to flee, to escape the judge's oppressive presence and the town's judgment. But then he remembered Clara, trapped in a cell, facing the gallows alone. The sight of her pale face, framed by the bars, anchored him to the moment. Every man has his price, the judge continued, his voice a low murmur that threatened to curl around Tad like smoke. And you, boy, you're about to find out just how much yours is. He leaned in, eyes narrowing, the scent of tobacco wafting between them. You're a good-hearted fool, trying to save a woman who's already lost. But justice in this town is like the wind. Hard to catch, and even harder to hold. Tad clenched his fists, the rough wood of the bar digging into his palm. If I can gather enough evidence, I can prove she didn't kill that man. The words came out more defiant than he felt. A thin line of hope against the judge's looming darkness. I'll find the real killer, no matter what it takes. The judge's laughter was a harsh bark, echoing around the saloon like a gunshot. You think you're the hero in this story? You're just a boy with a rifle and no idea what you're up against. You think this town loves its women as fiercely as you do? You're mistaken. It fears them. He straightened, brushing off the dust from his coat, and began to walk toward the exit, leaving Tad with the bitter taste of helplessness. As the door swung shut behind the judge, Tad stood rooted, the weight of the judge's words echoing in his mind like distant thunder. He could feel the eyes of the patrons boring into him, a dozen unspoken judgments layered upon his shoulders. He had always been a man of action, a cowboy with the spirit of a restless wind. But now he felt like a cornered animal, desperate and out of options. The flickering oil lamps cast long shadows, and with each heartbeat, he could feel time slipping away, like sand through a clenched fist. He glanced at the bar mirror, catching a glimpse of his own reflection. Eyes wide, grit lining his jaw. If he didn't act, Clara would hang by dawn's first light, swinging from a rope like a broken promise. The taste of desperation was sharp on his tongue, and he spat it out onto the wooden floor, a challenge to the silence that enveloped him. "Hey, Cowboy," a voice cut through the haze. It was Rufus, the bartender, a man whose loyalty was as slippery as the whiskey he poured. "You might want to think twice about that judge. He's got a way of making folks disappear, if you catch my drift." Rufus leaned in, his breath smelling of stale beer and fear. "You start asking the wrong questions, and the next bounty might be on your head." "Not if I can help it," Tad shot back, the fire in his voice surprising even himself. It wasn't just about Clara anymore. It was about standing up to a system that chewed men like him and spat them out without a second thought. "I'm not afraid of the judge. I'm not afraid of anyone." Rufus shrugged, the movement casual, but his eyes betraying concern. "You should be. The law here don't bend for the likes of you." He turned back to the bar, polishing glasses that didn't need cleaning, giving Tad space to breathe. Yet the air felt thick with unspoken warnings. With a final look at his reflection, Tad pushed through the swinging doors and stepped into the cool night. The stars shone overhead, bright pinpricks against a velvet sky, but their beauty felt mocking. He walked down the dirt road, boots crunching on gravel, each step echoing in the lonely night. The moon hung low, illuminating the path as he made his way to Clara's cell, a stone fortress that loomed ahead like a looming. The moon hung low, illuminating the path as he made his way to Clara's cell, a stone fortress that loomed ahead like a looming specter of despair. The shadows danced around him, twisted shapes of the night that whispered of secrets best left buried. Tad's heart pounded in rhythm with the crunch of gravel underfoot, each step a defiance against the shackles closing in on Clara. She was a woman like no other, her spirit as untamed as the wild stallions that roamed the prairie, and he had to save her. As he approached the jailhouse, the air thickened with the scent of damp earth and sweat. The wooden structure creaked in protest, a sentinel standing guard over the injustices within. A single lantern flickered by the front door, its light casting a warm but feeble glow. Tad could hear the muffled sounds of Clara's sobs from within, each one a knife twisting in his gut. He paused, hand resting on the splintered wood of the door, grappling with the choices laid before him. Rescuing her meant breaking the law, but the law had already betrayed her. The door swung open with a reluctant creak, revealing the dim interior. The sheriff, a burly man with a face like a thundercloud, sat behind a desk cluttered with papers and empty bottles. He looked up, his eyes narrowing into slits. "What are you doing here, Cowboy?" His voice rumbled like distant thunder, heavy with authority. "This ain't no place for a man with your reputation." "I'm here for Clara," Tad declared, his voice steady despite the tremor of fear clawing at his insides. "She's innocent, and you know it." He stepped further inside, the stale air thick with the scent of tobacco and despair. The sheriff let out a derisive laugh, the kind that echoed off the stone walls, reverberating with mockery. "Innocent? In this town? You're barking up the wrong tree. The judge has spoken, and come sunrise, that girl will swing. You're wasting your breath." He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms, a smug smile curling his lips. "You really think you can change that?" The flicker of hope inside Tad flared, igniting a spark of defiance. "I'm not leaving without her." He could feel the weight of his decision resting on his. The sheriff's laughter rolled through the room like thunder, ricocheting off the stone walls, mocking the very notion of justice. Tad felt a surge of anger swell within him, pushing against the fear that had gripped his heart. "You think you're the law?" He spat, his voice edged with defiance. "What you're doing is murder, plain and simple. I won't let it happen." The sheriff leaned forward, his elbows digging into the desk, eyes glinting like the barrel of a gun. "You think you can just waltz in here and play the hero? You don't know the first thing about this town, Cowboy. We don't take kindly to meddling." He gestured toward the door like it was an invitation to leave, an unspoken threat hanging in the air. But Tad's resolve sharpened, the world outside fading into the background as he focused on the woman locked away behind bars. Clara deserves a chance. If you won't give it to her, I will. He stepped closer, a move that drew the sheriff's attention like a moth to flame. The space between them crackled with tension, a standoff poised on the edge of violence. "Let me remind you," the sheriff said, voice low and dangerous. "The only reason you aren't already in chains is because I haven't bothered to arrest you yet. You've got a bounty on your head, and I'd collect it myself if you weren't so damn stubborn." He rose, towering over Tad, the shadows of the lantern flickering ominously around him. "You walk out that door, and you'll be a dead man." Tad gritted his teeth, the weight of that threat settling in his bones. But behind him, the sound of Clara's muffled sobs pushed him onward, a lifeline pulling him back from the edge. He turned sharply, moving toward the cell, where Clara huddled in the far corner, her hair falling in disarray like a curtain shielding her from the world. The bars loomed like the jagged teeth of a beast, framing her fragile figure. "Clara!" he called, his voice breaking through the despair that clung to the air. She looked up, eyes wide with shock, recognizing the man who had once promised her safety. "I'm here to get you out. We'll find a way." Her expression flickered between hope and despair. Clara's eyes glistened with unshed tears, the light from the lone lantern casting flickering shadows across her pallid face. "Tad, it's too late. They've decided my fate." Her voice was barely a whisper, a fragile thread woven with the weight of surrender. The bars of her cell were cold and unyielding, a stark reminder of the world outside. A world that had turned its back on her. "No," Tad insisted, stepping closer, the scent of dust and despair filling his nostrils. "I won't let them take you, not like this." His heart pounded in time with the urgency of the moment, each beat a reminder that time was slipping away like sand through his fingers. He could hear the distant sounds of boots echoing down the hallway, the sheriff's men likely moving to enforce the grim verdict of their crooked judge. "Don't be foolish," Clara pleaded, voice trembling. "You'll only put yourself in danger. It's what they want." She clutched her knees to her chest, as if trying to shield herself from the impending storm. The weight of her resignation hung heavy in the air, a stark contrast to Tad's fierce resolve. "I'm already in danger, Clara," he replied, his voice low but steady. "But I made a promise to protect you, and I intend to keep it." He glanced back toward the door, heart racing as the footsteps grew louder, the sheriff's laughter ringing in his ears like a death knell. "We have to move now." With a sudden determination, he reached through the bars and grasped her hand, feeling the chill of her skin against his. "Trust me," he urged, and for a fleeting moment, they shared a connection that transcended the grim reality that bound them. But even as he spoke, the air thickened with tension, the impending clash of wills palpable. The door swung open with a creak, revealing the sheriff and his two deputies, their faces set in grim lines, eyes narrowed with suspicion. "What's going on in here?" The sheriff barked, stepping into the dim light, his shadow swallowing the space. Tad released Clara's hand, instinctively stepping in front of her as if to shield her from the storm that was about to break. "I'm here to take her home," Tad declared, voice steely with conviction. The sheriff's lips curled into a sneer. "Home? To a rope and a noose?" The sheriff's laughter echoed in the small cell, a sound devoid of warmth. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, as if he were a king surveying his kingdom of ruin. "You really think you can just waltz in here and claim her? Judge Stroud set the wheels in motion, and they ain't stopping for some half-wit cowboy with delusions of grandeur." Tad stood firm, the dust of the floor seeping into his boots like the weight of his resolve. "You're wrong, Sheriff. The judge may have his say, but the law don't dictate what's right." The air between them crackled with tension, a standoff born of desperation and defiance. Clara watched, the flickering lantern casting shadows across her face, illuminating the fear that mingled with hope. "Right? Ha!" The sheriff spat, glancing back at his deputies, who shifted uneasily at the threshold. "This ain't about what's right. It's about what's legal, and you're standing in the way of justice. He pointed a finger at Tad, a crooked finger that seemed to hold the weight of 1,000 injustices. You're just a fool with a gun and a heart full of dreams. Better a fool than a coward, Tad retorted, his voice rising. The urgency of the moment quickened his pulse, his determination igniting like the sun cresting over the horizon. He could feel the weight of the world pressing down on him, the lives of the innocent hanging on the precipice of his next move. I won't let you take her. With a sudden motion, the sheriff drew his revolver, the metallic click echoing in the confined space. You think you can stand against me? You're a dead man walking, Tad. You want to save her? Try it, and I'll put you both in the ground. Clara's breath hitched, the fear clawing at her insides like a wild animal. Tad, don't! Get behind me! He barked, the instinct to protect her overriding all else. The sheriff's men shifted, eyes darting between their leader and the desperate cowboy, the tension thick enough to slice through with a knife. Tad could feel the weight of the revolver pressed against the small of his back. The unyielding steel a reminder of the